Welcome to the show. Tonight, big news. The Energy Minister says there's going to be a cut to your electricity bills at last. Well, actually, it's not a cut for all of you, and it's not much, and we'll tell you the real news later. Also tonight, can a politician with a $12 million beach house really still be a good Labor MP? And yes, she's alive and still married, the Princess of Wales caught on film, killing an internet worth of conspiracy theories. And a warning, a disturbing survey of the attitudes of Muslims in the Western country with 10% of them. What can mass immigration actually mean for the West? Also tonight, the Ukrainian ambassador goes nuts against the ABC, accusing it of screening vomit, garbage. I'll tell you about all that and more. But first, we are now seeing how much of our insane levels of immigration are hurting us, and how our politicians are fooling you about all this. Now, when I say insane, I mean it. I mean, last financial year, we took in an incredible 520,000 immigrants, more than 500,000 net in a single year. We increased our population by nearly 2%, by 2 Hobarts in 1 year. But are we building 2 Hobarts worth of houses every year for them all? 2 Hobarts of roads and trains and dams for their showers and gardens? Well, you know the answer. It's nothing like it. In fact, just when we need even more houses for all these new people, we've got a massive slowdown in building. We've got rising costs, a shortage of labour, supply chain issues, interest rates. It means this huge slump. 27,000 houses that were approved to start aren't going ahead now, or maybe ever. Now, that's one big reason why house prices have soared and why rental vacancies are now just 1.4%. Now, Claire O'Neill, our Home Affairs Minister, claimed last year, well, don't worry, she's right on top of this problem. Immigration numbers are now going to be slashed.
The kind of reduction in migration numbers that the government is driving for here are very, very substantial. We're talking about, going off a peak of what the numbers were last year, and the budget projections will suggest that that number will halve over a 2-year period. Very significant difference. And that's really important, Laura, because we've got a generation of Australians my age and younger who are living in our capital cities and feel that home ownership is a pipe dream for them, who can't even get into a rental. And it is not the time to be running very large migration programs.
So she perfectly understood the problem, but she was conning you, and so was the Prime Minister today.
Prime Minister, given permanent and long-term overseas arrivals are outpacing the construction of new homes at a rate of almost 4 to 1, can the Prime Minister tell the House how many new homes or units were built in January?
Australian population is now expected to be smaller in 2030-31 than the pre-pandemic forecast. For 2030-31, the expected population is 600,000 people, or 2.1%, below what was projected prior to the onset of the pandemic.
Don't trust what they say, just see what they do. Because instead of cutting immigration, they've ramped it up again. This is unbelievable. The immigration figures for January just been released. Net immigration for just 1 month, 55,000 more people coming into the country, net. That's the highest intake for any January on record. So how many more homes do these people need? Another 20,000 when we're already not even building enough for Australians right here? So why is the government doing all this? Sucking in incredible numbers of immigrants when we don't have the houses for them, when unemployment is rising, when our cities are full, when we're going to struggle to find the water for them come the next drought. Why is this happening? The answer's simple. If they didn't suck in all these new taxpayers, the government's budget would blow and the economy would be in recession. And if you think, well, that might be a reasonable excuse for more migrants, think again, because more people means you also have to divide the cake between more mouths. And when you look closer, you will see that per person we're actually getting a lot poorer, as Shadow Treasurer Angus Taylor pointed out today.
The latest national accounts confirm that Australia is in an entrenched per capita recession, or a family recession. At the same time, disposable income per person, living standards, have collapsed by 7.5% under Labor. Right now, population growth is the only thing left driving the economy.
And this big switcheroo, you know, more immigrants but lower living standards for the rest of us, became clownishly clear today when the New South Wales Premier complained, hey, with all these immigrants pouring into New South Wales, its share of GST tax is stretched too far. The GST today works out to $2,902 for everyone in New South Wales per person. But next year, with all these new people, it's going to be $80 a head less. Not fair, he said. But what Chris Minns didn't figure out is that for every state, it's the same story, more or less. More people means their GST take is also stretched over more people. And the real problem here is immigration. So then Minns got asked, well, why don't you just go and tell your mates in the Albanese government to cut immigration, turn off this fire hydrant? Suddenly he went all shy.
It's certainly not up to me to do that because the Commonwealth's responsible for immigration policy.
See, the fact is the premiers are also hooked on getting all these new immigrants to help their own budgets, even though they'll make you pay the price. We'll all get poorer, our cities will get crowded until they choke. And the big joke is that Chris Minns, who's now complaining, oh, how immigration is costing New South Wales, just 6 months ago was claiming he actually wanted more immigrants because he said they could then build the houses we now need for, wait, these same immigrants.
That's part of the reason why we're supportive of the Commonwealth Government's decision to lift immigration into New South Wales, notwithstanding the fact that we'll take not the majority but the greatest number of inbound immigrants. A lot of that labour coming into the state will be directed to the housing market, and we need them. We need them to build houses and apartments.
So we need to bring in more immigrants to build houses for more immigrants. I mean, seriously. And we still don't build enough of them. We are chasing our tail, yet getting further and further behind. This immigration racket is a con, and the people being conned by our politicians are you. Joining me is Leith Van Onselen, co-founder of Macro Business and a former Federal Treasury official. Leith Van Onselen, thank you so much for your time. The Albanese government last year said immigration would halve, you know, was on top of this problem. But the January figures are a record, more than 55,000 new immigrants, a record for any January. That's net in 1 month. Now, why is that?
Yeah, look, it's absolutely crazy numbers there, Andrew. So if you multiply that by 12 to give you an annual figure, that's about 660,000 in a year. It's also the highest January on record. It smashed last year's January, which I think was about 21,000. And that was in a record immigration year, obviously. So basically all indicators now are pointing to the fact that, immigration is going to run well past the Albanese government's projection of 375,000 this financial year. It's not only last week's numbers, but also the national accounts for the December quarter that were released showed that Australia's population grew by 680,000 people last calendar year. And that's up from the 624,000 in the latest official data we had for last financial year. So if anything, mate, immigration is rising, still rising, even now.
That is insane. That is just unbelievable. I think for legal immigration, this is probably setting a world record for a Western democracy in terms of percentage of population. Now, is there a clear link between the housing shortage we now have and this incredibly high rate of immigration?
Oh, absolutely there is. And anyone who denies it is basically a knucklehead or a liar. So rents fell at the start of the pandemic when immigration turned negative. And obviously we've had rents absolutely explode, up by about 38% since the start of the pandemic, after immigration was obviously rebooted to record levels. So, I mentioned before that the population grew by 680,000 last calendar year, according to the ABS. At the same time, ABS data released last week showed that we only added 166,000 net homes to our housing stock. So that means we only added one home per 4.5 new residents last year. And that is why I've got a rental crisis. And data projections released today by the Urban Development Institute of Australia suggest that it's going to get even worse. And they projected only 79,000 homes will be built across the combined capital cities in 2026, which is about 26% below what we built last year. So housing supply is going the wrong way at the same time as population growth still running, at these extreme levels. And all it means is the rental prices are going to keep getting worse. We're going to have rents rising, we're going to have people being forced to live in group housing and more homelessness unless they get these immigration numbers under control. It's as simple as that.
But Leith, let's pretend for a second that the immigration minister really is, swear to God, really is trying to cut our immigration intake. It's not working. What should the government be doing?
Oh, look, anyone with a shred of common sense would know that the government should be reducing immigration to a level that is below the nation's ability to build homes and infrastructure. Unfortunately, they're doing the opposite. And I suggest that net overseas migration needs to come down to, at a minimum, below 150,000 a year. I'd prefer more like 120,000 a year. And that would give us ability to actually catch up on the housing shortage and actually ensure that Australians are housed properly, and also that we can keep up with this infrastructure. Because the way it's going at the moment, we are a dog chasing its tail economy at the moment. We can't keep up, and the situation's just getting worse. Housing, infrastructure, everything, living standards. Yeah, well, what you're suggesting as an ideal rate is still half of what the government claims it wants to cut it to. It wants to halve it to about 250 odd. I mean, way too high. Incredible numbers. Why do you think it isn't doing something effective already to cut immigration? Look, the federal government loves immigration for two reasons. So first of all, it gives it the illusion of growth and the illusion that the economy has avoided recession, even though we're all going backwards individually and in per capita terms. The federal treasury also loves immigration because it boosts the tax receipts. So the federal government collects about 80% of the taxes. It collects all the personal income taxes and company taxes. Those all get juiced by immigration because you've got more people spending and obviously paying taxes. The problem with it is all the costs are then shunted onto the state governments and onto you and I. And so basically immigration's an easy way to grow the economy and federal budget revenues while the costs are deferred onto everyone else. And that's why the federal government keeps running this mad policy. I just find it unbelievable, Leith. I can't wait until it becomes a political issue. And I don't think that's far away now, even though most politicians seem to run from it very, very fast. Leith Van Onselen, thank you so much for your time. Thanks, Andrew. Anytime. Albanese government's big announcement today from the Albanese government, electricity bills. They're going to come down at last. Well, some of them. They're on their way at last to this promise, kind of, that the Labor Party made again and again before the last election.
Reducing power prices by $275.
By 2025, $275 a year.
$275 a year.
We'll get power prices down by $275 a year.
Instead, as you all know, electricity bills have gone the other way, up as much as 40% over the last 2 years. But now we're told, look, millions of Australians are going to get a cut in their bills after the energy regulator set a new standard market offer for the next financial year, at least a draft of it. And this will go and cut bills apparently from anything up to 3% for residential homes. Although, catch, some people will actually have to pay more. For small businesses, the cuts can be up to 10% nearly, or $487 a year, although bills will actually rise up to $53 for people in southeast Queensland and a bit less in country New South Wales. But let me paint all that in a picture for you. For customers of Ausgrid, for instance, it looks like this: a huge rise for 2 years in the power bills and this small fall now. As Liberal MP Melissa McIntosh pointed out to Energy Minister Chris Bowen today, asking him to admit he would now break his election promise to cut bills by $275 by next year, something Bowen actually dodged doing and dodged the blame as well.
This government promised Australians a $275 cut on their electricity bill by 2025. But households in my electorate of Lindsay are owed $1,027 cut to deliver on this promise. Today's release of draft regulated prices for electricity confirm this government's failure to deliver, with annual bills in Western Sydney up 37% on early 2022. Will the minister admit this promise will never be delivered?
What the announcement by the Australian Energy Regulator today shows is that energy prices are stabilising and falling after the biggest energy crisis the world has seen in 50 years.
Joining me is National Senator Matt Canavan, the former Resources Minister. Matt Canavan, any cost of living relief is good for Australians right now. So to that small margin, this is a win for the government, isn't it? But it still will be a broken promises because these are prices for 2025 and it shows the prices will not come down by $275.
Look, it's a Pyrrhic victory, if anyone, for the government, anything for the government, because, as you say, this is the day now that their promise to cut your power bills by $275 officially died. The notices are in the paper now that this promise is dead. It'll be buried soon, and we're just waiting for the government to admit that they actually have broken a promise for the cremation. But this promise was made to deliver this reduction in 2025. The government said 2 years ago, mind you, Andrew, after the Ukraine war had started, the government said, as you showed in your introduction there, that they would cut your power bills by $275. That was by 2025. These prices that are determined today are for the 2024-25 year. So that's why their promise has officially died with these reports today. And it will mean that instead of cutting your power bills by $275, some people are $300 or $400 worse off. Others are $500 or $600 worse off on average, depending on which state and which provider you use. And some then, of course, are actually $1,000 behind from the government promise of a $275 cut. And so this all just shows that the current government's approach is wrong. Our obsession with energy sources that do not work all the time is causing this crisis. And we need to get back to using all of our natural resources, sure, our renewable resources, but also our coal, our gas, and also our uranium too.
Well, talking about uranium, the opposition today tried to nail the Albanese government's hypocrisy. Now, the Prime Minister is running a juvenile anti-nuclear scare campaign against this. I mean, it really is juvenile. Let me show you one example of it. Here he is, the Prime Minister.
Labor is the party of the light on the hill. The Liberals just want us to glow in the dark.
Well, so you're the party, the opposition generally, the glow in the dark because you're pro-nuclear. So the opposition's defence spokesman asked today, well, what about Labor's nuclear reactors? Are they a danger too? Here is Andrew Hastie.
Can the Deputy Prime Minister confirm HMAS Stirling, in my home state of Western Australia, will be the home of Australia's future nuclear reactor-powered submarine fleet? Is the Minister aware of any safety concerns for local residents?
We are, of course, talking about a nuclear reactor of a size which will power a single machine. That's what we're talking about in terms of the nuclear reactors that are within the submarines. And we understand the sensitivity involved here and the safety that needs to be put in place. These are not nuclear reactors of the size, for example, which would power cities.
So, McCanavan, is that how it works? Your nuclear reactors being bigger, they will make people glow in the dark, but Labor's are perfectly safe. Is that a fair enough argument?
Look, it's the first I've heard that, and I'm laughing because of the ignorance of the Defence Minister, although that's perhaps no laughing matter, given he is responsible for procuring these vessels. In fact, the Virginia-class submarines have nuclear reactors around about 300 megawatts in capacity. So they are exactly the size of a small modular reactor, Andrew, exactly the size of what you'd get in a small modular reactor. And in fact, if you put 4 or 5 of them next to each other, say at HMAS Stirling in Fremantle, you'd create a power station of the size of a coal-fired power station or a modern nuclear power station. And sometimes, in my more troublemaking moments, I hope perhaps that's the government's plan, that in fact it will park these nuclear submarines somewhere in a harbour around Australia. It'll get a big extension cord from Bunnings and run that into our electricity grid, and that will perhaps save the day and keep the lights on for us all, because they are actually reliable power that can be guaranteed to work all at the time.
Oh, they're tripping over their own feet on this one. Just quickly, Matt, in Tasmania, the Labor leader, Rebecca White, they're going to an election there on Saturday, says our own nuclear subs will not be welcome under her in Tasmania, even though they're meant to defend Tasmanians too. Your response to that?
Well, she's got no power to do that. I mean, the position of Rebecca White on this is about as relevant as a typical Sydney Council member who wants to boycott and divest from Israel. They're not going to solve the centuries-long conflict in the Middle East, and Rebecca White is not going to stop nuclear subs going to Tasmania because the power over our defence forces and their transportation around our country is firmly under the control of the Australian government under our Constitution. And so, look, I'm a big believer that all levels of government should stick to their knitting here. We have a responsibility to defend our country, and especially in face of much higher risks. This is the right decision for our nation, and everybody should get on board to defend Australia.
Matt Canavan, always good to talk to you. Thank you for your time. Well, after the break, catching out the Hamas terrorists on another media lie, plus America's disgrace, how a Democrat judge and Democrat prosecutor are moving to take more than $500 million off Donald Trump, crippling his election campaign. This is Banana Republic stuff. Progress for Israel in its war against the Hamas terrorist group in Gaza. Israeli soldiers yesterday stormed the Al-Shifa hospital in Gaza City, which it says was being used as a Hamas base. In fact, drone footage shows Israeli soldiers coming under fire from the hospital. The Israelis killed a Hamas general there who was armed and was the head of operations in Hamas's internal security. Well, Hamas claims he's just coordinating food supplies. What a humanitarian. Yeah, I guess that's another Hamas lie, like saying Israelis are blocking food aid and causing mass starvation, when in fact this AP footage posted a week ago shows lots of food for sale in Rafah Market in the south of Gaza. And this unverified video seemingly shows even aid donated by the West being sold there, although it's supposed to be free. But to American politics. US President Joe Biden has suddenly turned on Israel. He started out very strong for Israel after it was attacked by Hamas last October. Now he's telling Israel not to attack Hamas in its last hideout in Rafah in the south of Gaza. And he's backed Chuck Schumer, the Democrat leader in the Senate, who's called for elections in Israel now to get rid of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, like it's all his fault. Joining me is Sean Spicer, the first White House spokesman of President Donald Trump. Sean Spicer, thank you so much indeed for your time. Joe Biden is now very much against the way Israel is fighting Hamas and is condoning attacks on Netanyahu, essentially undermining him as Prime Minister. Is this because the US public is turning against Israel as well?
It's well, not just the US public, Andrew. I think, to be more specific, a key part of the Democratic base, which is important to Joe Biden, when he goes through these Democratic primaries, even though he's clinched the nomination, you're seeing an uncommitted vote, something they allow in the Democratic primary, happen in several of the states. It was over 100,000 voters in Michigan alone, a key battleground state that's got 15 very important electoral votes. So it's not so much the U.S. public as it is key constituencies, one, within the Democratic Party, but also two, in key battleground states the president needs for re-election. This is it. I mean, his position on Israel up until this was pretty clear, as was Chuck Schumer's, by the way, our majority leader in the Senate. And suddenly, when their coalition starts falling apart, you see how quick they bail on their friends.
Absolutely. It's really quite disgraceful. The level of interference in domestic politics in Israel, I think, is quite extraordinary. Meanwhile, Sean, Donald Trump, he's finding it very hard. I mean, talk about, now, I won't get all conspiratorial here, but all these charges against him put by Democrat district attorneys, presided over, in many cases, by Democrat funding judges. He's finding it very hard to find a surety company that can give him the bond for the outrageous $450 million fine. That's nearly $700 million Australian that a Democrat backing judge awarded against him for alleged fraud. What happens if he doesn't come up with the cash?
So let's just be clear so your viewers understand this. He is appealing the decision, and the court has said that's fine while you appeal this, which, you know, if this was any other case, this wouldn't be, you have to either put up the money or a bond to the equivalent of what you're being fined. It's fascinating. I'm not a lawyer, but I'd never heard of this in my lifetime before this. So he has to basically, while he's, you know, going through his due process right to appeal the decision, he has to put either the complete amount of cash or a bond equivalent. So he's basically, you know, again, this is a problem I don't think I'll ever have, is how do I secure a bond on $500 million? But apparently it's not that easy. So we'll see how this goes. To your question, Letitia James, the Attorney General in New York, has said, great, if you can't secure a bond, I'm going to begin seizing some of your property. So maybe it's Trump Tower, maybe it's 40 Wall Street, maybe it's Trump International, all in New York, and claiming that these are now the property of New York. This is our equivalent of a bond while you go through the appeals process. Now, imagine that happening and how much that devalues the property and how much, I mean, so not allowing him to address this head on would have even further financial implications. It would be horrible.
It's just disgusting. I mean, if people can't see through what's going on, there's no hope for anyone. But I mean, seriously, Sean, this is Russia stuff. This is Banana Republic stuff. I mean, the size of the fine alone is just so out of whack that alone, you know, just sticks out right there.
But if I can, Andrew, just again for your viewers to understand this, because your outrage is well founded. Remember, what they got him on was something that said, hey, we don't think the terms of how you valued your buildings is accurate, right? Something that the lenders, the bankers all agreed was fine. They all got paid back. This is what we call a victimless crime. He was trying to value his properties at something to get a loan, maybe to buy another property or who knows. The banks were fine with the valuation. They're the ones who ultimately have to make that decision. And they were paid back. In fact, they were called in this case and were very clear that they were happy with the relationship and the transactions with Trump and his business. So the idea that New York State is stepping in and saying, despite the fact that you two are fine, we don't like the valuation and we're going to fine you, is absolutely insane.
Well, which bank would actually accept the valuation of a person coming to it saying, I want a loan and my property's worth this, without doing the most basic checks themselves? I mean, it's just a joke. The whole thing is a scam, really. Sean Spicer, thank you so very much for your time.
As always, thank you, Andrew.
After the break, Ukraine's ambassador goes nuts at the ABC for a documentary last night he calls A Bowl of Vomit, Total Garbage, and pro-Russian propaganda. I'll tell you why. Plus a shocking new survey on what France's 6 million Muslims really want. Welcome back. In a minute, a shocking new survey you really got to pay attention to, I think, on what France's 6 million Muslims really want. But first, here's a quick look at what's coming up on Shari tonight.
Thanks, Andrew. Well, last night we revealed that the Albanese government had removed intelligence chiefs from the National Security Committee of Cabinet. You won't believe who they've made a new regular attendee instead. I can tell you, this appointee has nothing to do with national security. I'll have more details at 8.
I think I know who that is. A friend of this show, so to speak. But before I get to the panel, I mentioned mass immigration earlier. One critical issue is, of course, how many people we import. The other critical issue is who we import, from which cultures. And that's something almost no politician dares to even discuss. Which brings me to a poll taken the other day for a French weekly, Le Journal du Dimanche, a survey on what the French Muslims think. And Muslims there, of course, make up 10% of France's population now. That's some 6 million people. And the results are frightening. 49%, according to this poll, want Catholics converted to Islam. France has been a majority Catholic country. 45% want the total destruction of Israel. 42% want to put Islamic Sharia law above French law. 39% have bad or very bad opinions of Jews. 25% even reject the word France, and 19% have sympathy for the Hamas terrorist group that's fighting Israel, and which started this war by slaughtering 1,200 Jews, kidnapping about 250 people and raping many women. You think, well, 90% support for Hamas could be worse, but in fact 90% of France's 6 million Muslims works out to about 100,000 plus who sympathise with a radical terrorist group. And if you think that's just the older generation, oh, well, you know, the young, they're going to assimilate. This survey found it was actually Muslims under 25 who supported Sharia law most, more than half. Culture counts. When will the West admit it? But for something I want to discuss with the panel. The ABC has just been attacked by Ukraine's ambassador in the most undiplomatic language I've ever heard from a diplomat. Last night, the ABC ran a documentary by a British filmmaker who was allowed by the Russians to film their side of the front line in their invasion of Ukraine and report what their soldiers thought. Here's the trailer of the film shown last night on Four Corners.
We are not monsters, we are humans, and we defend our motherland.
Unprecedented access.
The sounds here are so much more terrifying than Donetsk.
The other side of the Ukrainian war.
Do they feel the West doesn't understand them? Finished?
We should run now, we should go because...
Oh my gosh. How old are you?
19.
You lost friends?
Yeah.
Well, Ukraine's ambassador was today beside himself with rage and tweeted, "The program aired last night on Four Corners, Ukraine's War, the Other Side, was the journalistic equivalent of a bowl of vomit. It unquestioningly repeated and aired countless blatant lies, historical distortions, racist claims and propaganda narratives emanating from the Kremlin. It completely served the interests of Russia's dictator, Putin. It also minimised and denigrated the deaths of thousands of innocent Ukrainian men, women and children killed by Russian soldiers in an illegal and brutal invasion. The Australian Broadcasting Corporation should be ashamed that it put such total garbage to air." The ABC this afternoon defended the documentary as challenging but legitimate, said it added to our understanding, showed the full horror and impact of war, but it agreed to meet the ambassador to try to talk it all out. Joining me is my Tuesday panel, Will Kingston, host of Australiana, weekly podcast from The Spectator on politics and culture, and Danica DiGiorgio, host of our new chat show, The Jury, every Sunday here on Sky at 8 p.m. and prime time on Fridays at 7 p.m. Now, Will, here's another short excerpt from this documentary. Russian soldiers saying what he would do to the Ukrainians, who he calls fascists and blasphemers.
За свои кощунства, за весь свой беспредел фашистский, который они делают. Карать будем жестко.
Should the ABC have run this, Will? Should have run a documentary that didn't even challenge soldiers who denied the massacre on camera, the massacre and torture of Ukrainian civilians in Bucha?
Yes, of course they should have. I'm in the slightly uncomfortable position of sticking up for the ABC here. There is this instinct often amongst the media class, Andrew, that suggests that people are stupid, that if you put a piece of content in front of them, they're going to be mindlessly brainwashed like sheep. Same thing happens with Trump. You'll see stations like MSNBC come up and say, well, we're not going to promote what he says. It's dangerous language. And this is rubbish. People are not stupid. In this instance, they know Russia's an autocracy. They know war involves propaganda. They know that this is going to be biased, but we need to be able to put dangerous ideas out there because it encourages people to think critically about them. It encourages them to go to other sources, to read other things. But by just saying to the media, you need to push one particular narrative, that is the dangerous thing that we need to stand up against. Good on the ABC for putting dangerous ideas out there.
Danica, these are dangerous. That is the whole point. I admire Will's defence of free speech. I think he's got a point. On the other hand, Will doesn't see the kind of people that tweet to me about how wonderful Putin is and how wonderful Russia is and how terrible Ukraine is. They do fall for stupid things. What's your view? Should the ABC have run this?
Well, I actually disagree with Will, and I disagree here because this was not independent journalism. My issue is not going to Ukraine, going to make a film or a documentary about the war. That's not the problem here. But the problem that I have is that this filmmaker was embedded with the Russian army. Therefore, the Russian army were looking after this individual throughout the entire filming process. But the fact is we had Russian soldiers come out and say, no, war crimes didn't actually happen. Nothing to see here. It was all a blatant lie. And there was no pushback. But we know, though, that the UN has investigated war crimes and it found that Russia has indeed engaged in war crimes against Ukraine. There was no pushback. And I think in documentaries and I think in anything, you have to be able to show both sides accurately of the story. And I don't know how the ABC, Andrew, can come out and say that, quote, it was an important contribution to the reporting of war. Sure. But if you're not going to push back on the Putin propaganda and spew that rubbish all over the internet, all over television, then that becomes a serious issue, given the ABC actually has a charter to be fair and balanced. And that's what the problem is here.
Yeah, two responses there,
I think Will's
Andrew.
right. The both sides have to be... Sorry, go ahead. Go ahead, Will.
No, two responses. The first is journalists have been embedded with armies since well before World War One. That's not anything which is new. The second thing here is that the statutory obligation to show both sides comes up when they've been showing the Ukrainian side for well over 2 years. This is a different alternative view of this war, and it's indeed called the other side for a reason. But it doesn't mean that every single show needs to have a 50-50 balance of two sides of the story.
No,
I think you're getting both sides from the journalism that's been shown over a longer course of time.
But you can't have the propaganda side, Will. This is what makes it dangerous. And I understand as a journalist myself, I understand that people are embedded with the army. But you're playing with danger when you're embedded with the Russian army, where you know that they're going to spew the propaganda and you can't take those lies on face value and then put it in a documentary. You need to be able to show both sides of the argument and push back, because that's responsible journalism.
The thing here, Will, is of course that the filmmaker admitted that he was too scared to challenge someone who was telling him the massacres and torture and rapes in Bucha didn't actually occur. It's well documented they did. He walked away. And I think if you're filming in fear like that, you have to be very, very honest with the viewers and keep saying what you didn't dare show, what you didn't dare challenge, because otherwise you are falling into the hands of people who are not Mr. and Mrs. Reasonable, just another side of an argument.
Yeah, I take the point, but at the same time, I think that most people are smart enough to see the context around which that person was filming. And I think on balance, it is better that we do get that information out in the open than not have it at all.
Maybe. You could be right, except propaganda is called propaganda because it does actually work. And it works, of course, on the presumption that some people are stupid, maybe a lot, I don't know. Let's change up a little for that. I'm going to stick with you, Will. News that Andrew Charlton, the Federal Labor MP for the working class Western Sydney seat of Parramatta, has bought himself a $12 million holiday house at Palm Beach. Now, is there actually a problem with that? I mean, you know, Donald Trump is a multi-millionaire still, while he doesn't have to pay his fines, representing the working class, for instance. Is there a problem?
There's an existential problem for the ALP here, Andrew, and indeed most centre-left political parties, in that they are now run by the Andrew Charltons of this world, run by and for the Andrew Charltons of this world. Progressive, inner-city, identity-obsessed elites. But here's the thing, they can't win sustainable majorities at elections without their traditional working class bases. This is going to be the story on the left side of politics over the next decade, is how do they try and square that circle of the Andrew Charltons of this world who live in Palm Beach, big house in Palm Beach, trying to represent the needs of the aspirational working class. I don't really see how they can do it, but time will tell.
Danica?
Well, these wealthy elites are just completely out of touch, aren't they, with the constituents that they represent. And this is a real issue for Labor, given that the cost of living crisis is worsening. If you look at Parramatta, though, for example, the median weekly income is just over $2,000 for a family, which is not really much overall. And the median weekly rent is $620. And you've got Andrew Charlton a millionaire who's able to afford this luxury lifestyle, and that's fine. But he represents the working class in Parramatta and a number of seats around there in southwestern and western Sydney. Therefore, it becomes a complete optics issue because that's Labor heartland, and the person representing that seat doesn't actually represent what they're going through, and neither do they even understand it. And so that's going to be a big problem for Labor heading into the election.
Yeah, on the other hand, otherwise, if we go too much and the rich can't represent the poor, I've got to say, in the end, we can only represent ourselves. I mean, it's almost like identity politics. A white can't represent a black can't represent a white, all that. I don't know, but it does insulate you from some of the battles of the poor, which I think is Will's one of Will's beefs there, which is, I think, correct. Will Kingston, Danica Giorgio, great chat. Thank you so much to you both. I've got to say, by the way, suddenly 1,000 conspiracy theories have collapsed. For nearly 3 months, Catherine, the Princess of Wales, stayed out of the public eye as she recovered from major abdominal surgery, then got canned for digitally altering a picture of her children and herself. Was she terminally ill? Well, the internet was full of it. Was she dead already? Was her husband having an affair? I mean, it was just nuts. But now passers-by have snapped her shopping happily with her husband. All is now well after the biggest media overreaction so far in 2024. But the year is yet young. Seriously. After the break, our media bureaucrats want to crack down on the big social media companies. But which of the two should we trust to censor what we see? The Googles of this world, the government, plus the AFL releases its new jersey and name for its new Tasmanian team. But there's two problems, actually. Now, I get very nervous when big government starts telling even big tech what to publish or not. Because which of the two sides do you trust to say what you and your children should see or not? Best answer is probably neither. Or is it? Now, Julie Inman-Grant, Australia's online safety regulator, has issued please explain notices to social media companies Google, Meta, which is Facebook, Telegram, Reddit and X or Twitter. Notices to force them to explain what action they're taking against violent and extremist material, or else face fines.
Terrorism online has been a problem since the early days of the internet, but we now know that 71% of Australian teenagers are seeing seriously harmful content like this online. And our counterparts in the UK last week indicated that kids in primary school are starting to see violent extremism content on a regular basis. And we cannot let this content be normalized and our children anesthetized to its impacts.
Joining me is Trevor Long, a technology commentator who hosts two very popular podcasts, EFTM and Two Blokes Talking Tech. Trevor Long, thanks again for your time. What is the problem here that needs fixing, do you think?
Well, it's an interesting one because essentially the problem is this material exists online, whether it's child abuse material, extremist views, or terrorism-related materials. And the internet's a vast and wide place, and the concern here is that kids are seeing things they shouldn't see, and it should be the platforms, i.e., the publishers, that are responsible for stopping them seeing it. And I think it goes to your point of, is it really the platform's point to do that, or is it more about perhaps parenting around what kids are doing online? So that's the balance we've got. But the E-Safety Commissioner is pretty strong in her views that they should be at least reporting back as to what they're doing. I feel like they're just going to send back a report and saying, we're doing what we can to avoid a fine.
Yeah, so you don't seem convinced there is a problem that a government could fix or should be trusted to fix. Have I got you right there?
Well, let's take Telegram as an example, right? Telegram is a one-to-one or one-to-many messaging app that is fully encrypted. So, Andrew, if you were a member of a group about a topic of interest to you, I can't look at those messages even if I was the greatest hacker in the world, nor can the government, nor can Telegram. So the very people that make the app can't see the content that is on their app. So how on earth are we expecting Telegram to do anything about those messages if they can't see them? If they are reported, like a screenshot is taken and they're reported to Telegram, what actions are they taking to bring them down? very important. But again, if kids are our concern here, we have to be asking ourselves as parents, what apps are our kids engaging in? Who are they talking to? And when are they seeing this content? Because, Andrew, I scroll through the internet a lot, and I've never seen anything like this. So I wonder how the kids are being directed to this content.
That is a very good point, because I haven't either, to be honest. I mean, I go searching for trouble, I must admit, but I find a lot of videos of violence, people belting each other up, but that's about it. Which of these, you mentioned Telegram, which of these platforms do you think is the worst, the most problematic?
There's no doubt in my mind Telegram and WhatsApp, which is owned by Meta as well, because it's a one-to-one messaging service. But I think in terms of sharing, I think Facebook is probably the one that we need to be the most worried about. Once someone gets into the conspiracy theory rabbit hole, it's the same as when you get into the extremism rabbit hole. If you see something that resonates with you because you're in a slump personally, then you'll just see more and more and more of it. So if this content is available online on platforms like Facebook, people will see it as reputable, but actually it's just fear and propaganda. So I think Facebook is probably the one that has the greatest exposure to the general public.
Now, Trevor, I understand this E-Commission wants to do something about this, fine, but I'm thinking, how does all this work? These are international platforms. What's the danger of having governments in all sorts of countries, potentially more than 100 governments each having a say on what can or can't appear on these platforms? How does that work?
Exactly, Andrew. We live in a global society where no Australian, this is a subset of the Australian government trying to ask questions of these businesses. And these businesses are just going to send back a 2-page document outlining the amazing things they're doing to keep their platform safe. Of course, what are they going to say otherwise? But whether we could actually prevent them from changing or make them change that, I think it's fanciful to believe that without a huge united front, I don't see much changing here at all, other than for them to say, we're doing our best, we are moderating content when it's reported to us, and we encourage people to report that content. Kids aren't going to report that content. They're going to go, oh, cool, I'll watch another one of those videos. That's just how kids are.
Well, that's true too. And, if we get our say in the rules that these social giants operate, what about China? Does it get a say as well? That would worry me a lot. Trevor Long, thank you so much indeed for your time. Really appreciate it. And one last thing. The AFL has revealed the name and the jersey of its planned new Tasmanian team. And I have to say that jumper looks like something of the 1950s, maybe the 40s. It's just, to be frank, terrible. And the name is obvious, of course. It's the Tasmanian Devils. Now, there was one hitch in all this. Warner Brothers owns the trademark to the Tasmanian Devil after its famous cartoon character. And the Tasmania AFL chairman, Grant O'Brien, said, well, that was actually a bit difficult at first. The talks with the Warner Brothers over the use of the Devil's name, initially tough, he said, but things did go a lot smoother when the company became aware that the Tasmanian Devil was the actual name of a real animal. How about that? How often it is that ignorance is the real problem. I have to say there's another problem here, by the way. I noticed that the timing of this was just a few days before Saturday's election in Tasmania. And that is going to help the Liberal government, which promised the AFL in exchange for this team, it would build them a brand new stadium that a number of Tasmanians think they can't afford near Hobart. Is this the AFL meddling in local politics? I wouldn't put it past them at all. Anyway, that's it from me tonight. Up next is Sharry.